Good day, everyone. When I last left off with my stories, I had explained to you who the Saints of the 12 were and why they were marked as men and women of extraordinary valor. From their inception to their holidays, we discussed why the saints themselves had become just as important to some civilizations as the worship of the 12 themselves. Today, we shall be continuing these stories as I explain several more saints for you all to consider. So, if you're new to this series, I suggest listening in on my previous lecture first, so you don't miss any details. But, without further ado, let us begin. The Sympathy of Saint Zozonan. The Lalafell known as Zozonan was a friar working at a chapel within a big city. However, this place was in proximity to a long and drawn-out war that had upended many people's lives. Because of this, many refugees that had lost their towns and homes to the war were now migrating to nearby cities for help. But not every culture was generous. Zozonan watched as the refugees made it to the city walls, observing their desperation firsthand. He saw men so exhausted they couldn't defend their own families, and mothers were feeding what few scraps of food they had to their children just so that their offspring wouldn't starve. The sight of this broke Zozonan's heart, deciding that he couldn't simply sit in his chapel after seeing this. As a man of the cloth, Zozonan began to walk between the different shops of his proud city, requesting alms for the struggling souls he had witnessed. He visited many places, explaining the plight of these people and that anything would help. But everyone turned him away. Not a single coin was offered to Zozonan. It was with a heavy heart that he went back to his chapel, but upon returning, he got an idea. He gathered together all the things within his chapel that had any real value. He then returned to the markets that had ignored his plea, selling what few valuables his chapel had for coin. He then used that coin to fill a cart with food before bringing all of it to the displaced souls outside the city. His actions did not go unnoticed, and some of the people that refused his request for alms saw him selling what he had to help those people himself. Observing such generosity placed shame in the hearts of these people, and eventually the guilt of their own greed became heavier than the coins in their pockets. It started with just one individual leaving the city to help Zozonan, then another, and then groups started to appear. Eventually, crowds of people had come to help these unfortunate souls. It was because of his selflessness that the city was moved to act. For his charitable soul, Zozonan was named the Saint of Sympathy, and has been given the eternal blessings of the traders, Nalthal. The Resolve of Saint Delaine. Once, there was a festive town, and everyone was enjoying the revelry. Everyone but Elaine. She had approached the crowd of people, scythe in hand, shouting and raving that everyone needed to flee into the fields right now. Everyone was confused. Elaine was usually so calm and kind, a respected member of the community. So to see her so furious and with a weapon in hand made the townsfolk uneasy. Were they under attack? Had Elaine gone mad? No one knew. However, they did as she demanded, abandoning their party and fleeing into the fields. Soon after the town had left their festival, a mighty tornado had appeared and touched down. It rampaged through the now abandoned town, and everyone was in shock. But as they turned to look at Elaine, she was now wearing a familiar smile on her face. Having attended to these lands for many years, she knew its weather and warnings by heart, and knew this was going to happen. Sensing this catastrophe, Elaine chose to feign madness in order to evacuate everyone as quickly as possible, as any real explanation would have taken too long, and not everyone might have believed her. She did not see her reputation as something worth more than the lives of her friends and neighbors. For doing what she felt was necessary to save everyone, Elaine was named the Saint of Resolve, and was said to be guided by Nafika. The confidence of Saint Merrill. Lady Merrill was an archaeologist of great respect. In fact, she was one of the lead researchers in uncovering the ruins of the once glorious city of Sildee. But it wasn't just her work that she approached with great detail. Lady Merrill had nearly several hundred people working under her authority, and she took meticulous care to memorize the names and lives of everyone. She was so attentive that she even sent name day presents to their sons and daughters. Not only that, but by learning about her people, she knew about each and every one of their individual talents, and knew exactly what jobs would be best for all of them. This endeared everyone to her methods, so when she made a command, they all listened to her without debate or hesitation. This is why the excavation of Sildee's ruins were nearly flawless, as everyone was not only doing what they were best at, they were happy. For the conviction she inspired in everyone she met, Lady Merrill was named the Saint of Confidence and was raised as a Saint of Althic. The constancy of Saint Morgan. Far off in a distant castle, there were two brothers. These brothers were close and often shared stories with each other. But one day, a minor dispute between them became an argument, and from there, it only got worse. At first, it was just some raised voices. Next came the insults being shouted at each other. And then finally, things like gauntlets, cutlery, and the castle's cat were being thrown back and forth at each other. Both brothers approached Morgan, who was known as the greatest smith in town. The brothers commissioned this Rogadin to make a pair of blades for their upcoming duel, which he accepted. But Morgan would have to do more and more work to these blades, as both brothers would approach him mid-craft in order to give him additional instructions. As petty as this became, he was indeed a smith of honor, and did as his customers demanded. But when the day of the duel finally arrived, the gathered audience was shocked to see that these two swords were more like blunt and gaudy clubs made of metal. Everyone looked at Morgan, who simply shrugged, insisting that despite his reputation for excellence, he wasn't going to create a product that his customers didn't ask for. The two brothers received exactly what they paid for. For his patience and reliability, Morgan was named the Saint of Constancy and was blessed by Rhalgr. The charity of Saint Lothmay. Loss is never easy. This was a lesson that Lothmay knew very well. In her youth, she was married to a man whom she loved with all her heart. But a mortal body is a surprisingly fragile thing, and one unfortunate day, Lothmay was made a widow. She struggled for a time, as suddenly losing her partner made her life that much harder. Now an old woman, she saw other young ladies going through the same hardship that she endured. Lothmay became their companions, teaching these widows how to weave, knit, and spin yarn. She gave up her skills to them willingly so that these now lonely souls could still provide for themselves and any children they might have had before losing their husbands. She never asked for anything in return, and knowing that they wouldn't endure the same loneliness as she did was enough for her. By giving up her time and skills freely, Lothmay was named the Saint of Charity and earned the respect of Nimia. The ingenuity of Saint Alyssa. Times of war and prosperity never coexist, not truly, and Alyssa knew this. So when a war broke out in her nation and rations of food started to become more and more scarce, things needed to change. As resources like grain for bread became harder to harvest, the soldiers began to go hungry, and their growing frustration threatened the war effort. This was when Alyssa sprang into action. She began to experiment with all types of grain that she had, practicing different baking techniques until she successfully created a denser and more filling type of bread. The problem with low grain was still present, but by creating a denser and more delicious bread, it meant that the soldiers would need to chew more often and extend the eating process just long enough to stave off their hunger. Soon, the soldiers' complaints disappeared entirely, meaning that they could focus on returning their country back to a time of prosperity. For her clever use of limited resources, Alyssa was named the Saint of Ingenuity, and said to have been emboldened by Menphina. The piety of Saint Daita. There was once a great lake that was filled with plentiful brass loaches, a type of fish that many people depended on for food and trade. However, as the seasons passed, the fishermen started to realize that there were fewer and fewer fish to catch. This was alarming, as their way of life was now in jeopardy. As such, they beseeched Daita, a Makote who was well known for her wisdom, and it only took her one glance to see their problem. She immediately scolded the fishermen, revealing to them that they were fishing up the juvenile fish as well as the pregnant ones with eggs. By not allowing the young to mature or the females to give birth, the population was on a steady decline and on the brink of disappearing. She began to lecture them on the balance of nature and the importance of moderation. To drive this lesson home, she grabbed a nearby tree branch and snapped off a twig, instructing them to only keep fish that were close to the twig's length. The fishers took her lesson and the twig to heart, and it only took a few summers of following her advice for the Grand Lake to become overly abundant with fish once more. Daita was revered for her respect of life's flow, and was named the Saint of Piety, earning the blessings of Limlane. And that, my friends, was another collection of saints and their historic deeds. These tales really drive home the idea that it doesn't take an unbeatable hero to make a difference. Even if it's not affecting the world, just doing something for your town, city, or community is enough to spread goodwill and likely inspire others to do the same. As for my part, I will continue my labors and resume my stories at a later date. But until then, tell me, which of these stories resonated with you the most? And have you seen anyone perform deeds worthy of sainthood? Let those thoughts tumble in your mind for a time. But as always, until next we meet, stay safe, my friends. Thank you all for watching to the end. If you enjoyed this video, why not subscribe and share this with your fellow adventurers? With your help, I'll try to reach out even further and bring even greater stories to you. Although, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge my biggest contributors. A grand thank you to Papaya Cyan, Rovakis, Potato, Sage Mouse, Vavalisoma, Sizani, Tyradox, and Net, with an additional nod to the scholarships on screen. Links to things like my Twitter and that of my channel artist Caddy can be found in the description. Thank you all for your viewership as well as your support, and I hope all of you have a wonderful day. Class dismissed.